What's going on? I'm Janika Renee.
I'm Maisha Bryant.
And I'm Joshua Bolden. You're tuned into the hottest ticket in Memphis. This is After the X.
Omar Tyree. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and he dishes on his latest book and some of his business ventures. Take a look at this.
Omar Tyree here, seller of so many books, New York Times bestsellers. I want to ask, when you were younger, a little kid, did you plan to be an author or did you have other dreams?
I wanted to be a football player. I was a typical athletic black male in the inner city of Philadelphia, and we competed against everything: football, boxing, track. And so I wanted to play football, and I got to the college level at the University of Pittsburgh, and that's when I found out I had a knack for storytelling. I wasn't writing on paper, but I was storytelling and vocal things. You going to parties, the football games, girls. So I was a person who would tell stories vocally. And then once we got to college, they wanted us to write it down. And then I found out I was good at writing it down as well. And so from there, I said, hey, if this football thing don't work, I can go ahead and do the writer thing. And that's what happened. It's very hard to become a professional athlete in America. And so once I found I could do something different, I went ahead and did that.
So what age were you exactly when you first wrote? Fly Girl wasn't the first book, right?
No.
It was Colored.
A book called Colored on White Campus, because I was at the University of Pittsburgh and the population was about 3% black, and that's the way it typically is at most predominantly white schools. Typically they have these gigantic athletic programs. The only black students going there are the athletes and a few other black students, and that's where it still is in America. So I wrote that book Colored on White Campus because that's how I felt, and it was like the colored people, and we just a small dot on these campuses. And that was the book I wrote first, and then Fly Girl was the second book. But Fly Girl was the one that took off mainly because women read more than men do, and they really loved that book, and so they continue to read it, and it's still one of the best-selling books now. So that was a real blessing to have that book.
Did you already know from when you began writing it that it would be a New York Times bestseller?
No, that book took a while to become a New York Times bestseller. The sequel, For the Love of Money, became a New York Times bestseller out the gate because I was marketing and promoting, and then they had a whole lot of people that already read Fly Girl that were waiting for the sequel. And so that book became a New York Times bestseller faster than Fly Girl did. Yeah.
Okay, so how did you start your production company? I'm very interested because I want to begin writing. So can you explain to me, how did you start your production company and how did you begin writing like that?
Well, actually, I have a degree in print journalism, and so they teach us copy editing and graphic design, and then you're dealing with newspapers, books, magazines, and so I actually have a degree in it. And so I tell people all the time, you have to figure it out, work for newspapers, work for magazines, or go ahead and take some college courses. So I'm not a person that just picked it up out of nowhere. You know what I mean? I have a degree in it, and so I understand exactly what I need to do to make it happen. And I started off as a newspaper journalist and writer, putting together newspapers, and so I was already doing. I was writing freelance for magazines, and so I'm around printing all the time. And so the difference was newspaper and magazine to books. It's a different form, but it's the same thing. It's the editing, it's the cover design, typesetting, then dealing with printers. And so yeah, for the most part, if you don't have all that information, I do a consultation. You can go to Omar Tyree at AOL.com, email me, and then I'll send you the consultation I do for new writers and publishers.
So with the business side of it, how did you get into that? When journalism really doesn't teach us the business side too much.
Well, I'm a Philadelphian, so we hustlers naturally, so I'm trying to get it. And so when I had books out for sale, I had to borrow money from friends and family, and I had to pay them back. And so I had to force those books on people. Buy my book, it's $10, I'll sign it for you. And so I took my books back to school because I started publishing right after college. And so I took them back to my school at Howard University at that point. I transferred from Pitt to Howard after my sophomore year, and I did my last 2 years at Howard as a journalism major, and I took my books right back to school with all my teachers and sold all my teachers, all my friends and family members, and then I started doing expo events just like this one, and I was a very aggressive salesperson. If you walk past my table, I was going to put a book in your hand and tell you to buy it, and then you were going to have to talk me out of getting your money. You'd have to give the book back to me, so I was very aggressive at that point. I can't be as aggressive now because people know me, and then they'll start start talking about you. He's trying to push your book on me, that daggone Omar. But back then, they didn't know who I was, so they would have been like, some boy tried to push some Omar guy tried to, so I didn't care back then. And I was very aggressive about sales because at the end of the day, you have to move your product. And I was very adapted doing that.
Okay, and where can we find your books at? Not at expos, but where else can we find the books?
My books are everywhere. You got Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. A lot of the bookstores are closed down, but they have a computer system. And if you say, look up Omar Tyree, all the books will pop up and they say, okay, we'll order it for you. So all the bookstores have it. It's not some obscure book where you got to go to some special place to get it. I've been published by Simon & Schuster for the last 20 years, which is one of the biggest publishers in the world. And so you can get my books anywhere. And if you ask for it at the stores, they will get it for you. Yeah.